They laughed at the rancher's Apache brides, then froze when they spoke perfect English. Sterling Maddox rode into Millbrook with 3 women who never spoke a word. Not to him, not to each other, not to anyone. The townspeople gathered around, whispering, pointing, making their assumptions about the silent Apache women trailing behind his horse. But something was wrong with this picture. The women wore traditional Apache dress. Yes, but their posture was different, too straight, too confident. And their eyes held secrets that made no sense. The strangest part? Every morning for 3 days, Sterling had been seen writing in a leather journal. But he couldn't write. Everyone knew ranchers like him barely knew their letters. So who was teaching him? And why did the women watch him so intently when he wrote, as if they were correcting every stroke of his pen? The town had one rule. Apache women didn't speak English. They grunted. They gestured. They stayed silent. That's how it had always been. But when the crowd pressed closer, when the insults got louder, when someone finally pushed too far, that rule shattered like glass. Because what happened next changed everything the town thought they knew about intelligence, education, and exactly who was teaching whom. Sterling dismounted outside the courthouse, dust swirling around his boots. The 3 women slid gracefully from their horses, moving with a precision that seemed almost rehearsed. Mayor Crawford pushed through the gathering crowd, his face twisted with disgust. "Maddox, what in blazes are you doing bringing them here?" Crawford spat tobacco juice near Sterling's feet. "This is a civilized town." Sterling's jaw tightened. "Come to register my marriages. Same as any man's got the right to do." The crowd erupted in laughter. Women clutched their children closer. Men shook their heads in mock pity. But the 3 Apache women stood perfectly still, their dark eyes scanning the hostile faces with an unsettling calm. They seemed to be memorizing every sneer, every cruel word. "Marriages!" Crawford's voice cracked with amusement. "Boy, you can't marry savages. They don't even understand what marriage means." One of the women, the tallest with intricate beadwork across her dress, tilted her head slightly. Just a fraction of movement, but Sterling noticed. So did she understand? Her fingers drummed once against her side, a subtle rhythm that meant something. "I got papers," Sterling said, reaching into his vest pocket. "Legal documents drawn up proper." "Documents?" Crawford snatched the papers, squinting at the careful handwriting. "Who wrote this for you, Maddox? This penmanship's too fine for a rancher." Sterling's eyes darted toward the women. The tallest one's lips twitched, barely visible, but there. The second woman, shorter with silver threads in her black hair, studied the crowd with the focused attention of someone who understood every insult being hurled their way. But they remained silent. "Maybe he paid someone in the next town," suggested Mrs. Holloway, the banker's wife. "Though I can't imagine why anyone would waste good paper on this nonsense." That's when the third woman stepped forward, younger than the others, with fierce intelligence burning in her eyes. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, shooting a quick glance at her companions. The crowd held its breath, but she said nothing. Instead, she reached into a small beaded pouch and pulled out what looked like a folded letter. She held it toward Sterling, who took it with hands that trembled slightly. What was written on that letter would turn everything upside down. Sterling unfolded the letter with nervous fingers. His eyes widened as he read the elegant script, handwriting that put the courthouse documents to shame. Mayor Crawford tried to peer over his shoulder, but Sterling pulled the paper closer to his chest. "What's it say, Maddox?" Crawford demanded. "More of your make-believe nonsense?" Sterling looked up at the 3 women. The youngest one watched him intently. Her head tilted in a way that suggested she was waiting for something specific. The other 2 flanked her like silent guardians, but their eyes held the same expectant look. "It's..." Sterling's voice caught. "It's instructions. For the ceremony." The crowd pressed closer. Mrs. Holloway elbowed her way to the front, her face pinched with curiosity. "Instructions? What kind of instructions could those creatures possibly give you?" The word "creatures" hit the air like a slap. The tallest Apache woman's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. The silver-haired one's fingers curled into fists at her sides. But the youngest, she smiled, a cold, knowing smile that sent chills down Sterling's spine. "They want the ceremony performed inside," Sterling said, reading from the letter. "At the altar, with witnesses." "Inside the church?" Reverend Michaels pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with indignation. "Absolutely not. We don't permit heathens in the Lord's house." That's when something shifted in the women's demeanor. The youngest stepped forward, her dark eyes fixed on the Reverend with laser intensity. She opened her mouth again, and this time everyone held their breath waiting. But instead of speaking, she reached into her pouch and withdrew 3 small books. Leather-bound, well-worn volumes that she held out for everyone to see. The titles were in English, but from this distance no one could read them clearly. "What are those?" Crawford squinted at the books. The woman with silver in her hair took one of the volumes and opened it to a marked page. She showed it to Sterling, pointing at a specific passage with her finger. Her touch was gentle, educated, the way someone handles a treasured text. Sterling's face went white as he read. His hands began to shake. "What does it say?" Mrs. Holloway demanded. Sterling swallowed hard. "It's about marriage customs, but not Apache customs. It's about—" He paused, looking at the women again. They nodded encouragingly. "It's about proper Christian marriage ceremonies." The crowd fell silent. Someone in the back whispered, "How would they know about Christian ceremonies?" The youngest woman closed her book and tucked it away. Then she did something that made everyone freeze. She walked directly to Mayor Crawford, looked him straight in the eye, and slowly, deliberately, curtsied. A perfect, elegant curtsy that would have impressed the finest ladies in the state capitol. Where had an Apache woman learned to curtsy like that? Before anyone could process what they'd just witnessed, the sound of approaching horses echoed down the main street. Heavy hoofbeats, multiple riders, and they were coming fast. Sterling recognized those horses, his face drained of color. Someone had sent word to the territorial authorities, and they were coming with questions that could get everyone killed. Captain Hawthorne rode into the square with 5 armed soldiers, their uniforms bearing the territorial seal. The crowd instinctively stepped back, but Sterling stood his ground, the 3 Apache women flanking him like a silent honor guard. "Maddox." Hawthorne's voice carried military authority. "We received reports of an illegal marriage ceremony involving Apache women. You know the regulations about tribal relations." Sterling's mouth went dry. The territorial laws were clear. White settlers couldn't marry Apache women without proper documentation from the Indian Agency, and those permits took months to obtain, if they were granted at all. "I got papers." "Captain," Sterling said, holding up the courthouse documents. Hawthorne dismounted, his boots hitting the dirt with authority. "Let me see those." He snatched the papers and studied them with trained eyes. "These are local courthouse documents. Where's your Indian Agency permit?" The crowd murmured anxiously. This was getting serious. Without proper permits, Sterling could face imprisonment, and the women could be forcibly returned to the reservation. That's when the tallest Apache woman stepped forward. She reached into her dress and withdrew a leather envelope, sealed with red wax. She handed it directly to Captain Hawthorne with the composure of someone accustomed to dealing with military officials. Hawthorne stared at the envelope, confused. "What's this?" The woman gestured toward the seal, then pointed at Sterling, then at herself and her companions. Her movements were precise, deliberate, the kind of silent communication someone might use if they were fluent in the language but choosing not to speak. "She's trying to tell you something," Mrs. Holloway whispered. Hawthorne broke the seal and unfolded the document inside. His expression changed immediately. The paper seemed official, heavy stock, formal language, multiple signatures. This is a letter of introduction from the Indian school in Carlisle." The crowd gasped. Everyone had heard of Carlisle, the government boarding school where Apache children were sent to be civilized. But these were grown women. What business would they have with Carlisle? The silver-haired woman stepped forward and showed Hawthorne one of the leather books she carried. She opened it to a specific page and pointed at what appeared to be an inscription written in careful script. "Property of Carlisle Indian Industrial School," Hawthorne read aloud. "Student number 247. He looked up at the woman with new interest. "You attended Carlisle?" She nodded once, then gestured to her companions. They had all been students there. The crowd fell silent. Carlisle students learned English, arithmetic, and proper Christian behavior. They studied literature, music, and etiquette. If these women were Carlisle graduates, they were educated to the same standard as any white woman in the territory. "But that don't make sense," Crawford protested. "Carlisle students don't come back to the reservation. They stay in civilized society, work as teachers or domestics." The youngest woman opened her book again and showed Hawthorne another page. This one contained what looked like a graduation certificate, dated 3 years prior. "Graduate teachers," Hawthorne read slowly. certified to instruct in English, mathematics, and domestic sciences. Sterling's hands trembled as the pieces fell into place. These weren't just any Apache women. They were educated teachers. And if they were teachers certified by the government school system, their marriage to a white settler wouldn't just be legal, it might even be encouraged as part of the civilizing mission. But why hadn't they spoken? Why the elaborate charade of silence? The answer came when a new rider appeared at the end of the street. A man in a black suit, riding hard, his horse lathered with sweat. As he drew closer, Sterling could see the badge pinned to his lapel. Indian Agent Morrison had arrived, and the look on his face suggested someone had told him a very different story about what was happening in Millbrook. Someone had been lying. But who? Agent Morrison's horse skidded to a halt, sending dust clouds swirling around the tense crowd. His face was red with fury and exhaustion from hard riding. "Captain Hawthorne," he barked, dismounting quickly. "I received an urgent telegram about stolen Apache women being held against their will by a settler named Maddox." The crowd exchanged confused glances. "Stolen?" Sterling's face went pale. "That's not true. They came willingly. We were married proper." Morrison pulled out a crumpled telegram from his coat pocket. "This message claims you kidnapped 3 Apache women from the reservation and forced them into illegal marriages." He squinted at Sterling with suspicion. The sender said the women were trying to escape but couldn't speak English to call for help. The 3 Apache women stood perfectly still, but something had changed in their posture. The tallest one's hands clenched into fists. The silver-haired one's breathing became shallow and rapid. The youngest tilted her head, studying Morrison with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "Who sent that telegram?" Captain Hawthorne demanded. Morrison consulted the paper. "Someone named Garrett Finch. Claims to be a concerned citizen who witnessed the abduction." Sterling's blood ran cold. Garrett Finch owned the largest ranch in the territory and had been pressuring Sterling to sell his land for months. If Sterling was arrested and his property confiscated, Finch could buy it at auction for practically nothing. "That's a lie," Sterling said. "Finch wants my ranch. He's been trying to force me out for a year." "Convenient story," Morrison replied. "But these women can't defend themselves. They don't speak English." He turned to the Apache women. "Ladies, if you're being held against your will, you can come with me now. I'll return you safely to the reservation." The 3 women looked at each other, and for the first time something passed between them, a silent communication that seemed almost like spoken words. The youngest raised her eyebrows slightly. The silver-haired one shook her head almost imperceptibly. The tallest one pressed her lips together in what might have been suppressed anger. Morrison stepped closer. "You don't have to be afraid. If this man has threatened you or forced you into anything, just nod and I'll arrest him immediately." The youngest woman stepped forward. She looked Morrison directly in the eye, then slowly, deliberately, she shook her head no. "She's refusing help," Morrison said, surprised. "But that doesn't make sense. If they can't speak English, how do they understand what's happening?" Mrs. Holloway spoke up. "Agent Morrison, we just discovered these women are Carlisle graduates. They're certified teachers." Morrison's expression shifted. Carlisle graduates complicated everything. They weren't typical reservation Apache. They were government-trained, officially educated, and legally entitled to make their own decisions about marriage and employment. "If they're Carlisle graduates, then they can speak for themselves," Morrison said. "Ladies, I need you to tell me plainly, did this man force you into marriage, or did you come willingly?" The crowd held its collective breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the moment when the truth would finally come out. The 3 women looked at each other again. The youngest nodded slightly to her companions. The silver-haired one straightened her shoulders. The tallest one took a deep breath. All 3 opened their mouths to speak. But before they could utter a single word, the sound of galloping horses thundered down the main street. 3 riders approached fast, and Sterling's heart stopped when he recognized the lead horse. Garrett Finch had arrived with 2 hired men, and the guns on their hips weren't for show. Garrett Finch reined his horse to a halt, his 2 hired gunmen flanking him like wolves. His smile was cold and calculated as he surveyed the scene. Sterling surrounded by soldiers, Apache women, and an entire town watching the drama unfold. "Well, well," Finch drawled, adjusting his hat. "Looks like my telegram reached the right people after all." Agent Morrison stepped forward. "Mr. Finch, I presume? You're the one who reported the abduction?" "Sure am." Finch dismounted slowly, his hand never straying far from his gun. Couldn't stand by and watch innocent Apache women being held captive by a desperate man. Sterling's face flushed with anger. You lying snake. This is about my ranch, and you know it. Your ranch? Finch laughed. Maddox, you're about to be arrested for kidnapping. When that happens, your land reverts to territorial auction. I'm just looking out for the community. Captain Hawthorne looked confused. But these women are Carlisle graduates. They're educated, free to make their own choices. Are they? Finch's eyes glittered dangerously. Have you actually heard them speak English? Or are you just taking everyone's word for it? The challenge hung in the air like a noose. Every eye turned to the 3 Apache women, who stood perfectly still in the center of the growing circle of people. The moment everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived. Agent Morrison cleared his throat. Ladies, I need you to speak clearly, in English. Tell us whether you came here willingly or were forced. The silence stretched so long that people began shifting uncomfortably. Finch's smile widened. His plan was working perfectly. Then the tallest Apache woman stepped forward. She looked directly at Finch, then at Morrison, then let her gaze sweep across the entire crowd of townspeople who had mocked and dismissed her all day. When she spoke, her voice was clear, precise, and carried the refined accent of someone educated in the finest institutions. Gentlemen, I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding. The entire crowd froze. Jaws dropped. Women gasped. Children stopped their fidgeting. Even the horses seemed to sense something momentous had just occurred. Her English wasn't just perfect. It was eloquent, educated, and spoken with more refinement than most of the townspeople possessed. She continued, her voice carrying easily across the stunned silence. My name is Ayanna Crowfeather, graduate of Carlisle Industrial School, class of 1878. I hold certification in English literature, mathematics, and educational instruction. The silver-haired woman stepped forward. I am Kiona Standing Bear, Carlisle graduate, certified in domestic sciences and Christian theology. Her accent carried traces of Eastern education that rivaled any finishing school. The youngest woman smiled coldly at Finch. And I am Takala Swift Arrow, certified teacher and fluent in English, Apache, Spanish, and French. She paused for effect. I also happen to be quite proficient in legal documentation and territorial law. The crowd stood in absolute shock. These weren't the savage women they had mocked all day. These were educated professionals who spoke better English than half the people in Millbrook. But Finch wasn't finished. His face twisted with rage as his careful plan crumbled around him. Doesn't matter, he snarled, his hand moving toward his gun. Apache women still can't legally marry white men without proper permits, and those permits don't exist. Takala smiled. Actually, Mr. Finch, they do. Would you like to see them? Takala reached into her beaded pouch and withdrew a thick envelope sealed with official wax stamps. She handed it to Agent Morrison with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what it contained. Morrison broke the seal and unfolded the documents inside. His eyes widened as he read. These are marriage permits issued by the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington, signed by the territorial governor and the Indian commissioner himself. The crowd pressed closer. Still reeling feet perfect, Mrs. Holloway clutched her husband's arm, her face pale with embarrassment. Mayor Crawford's mouth hung open like a lidded fish. That's impossible, Finch snarled. Those permits take months to obtain. How could 3 Apache women navigate federal bureaucracy better than you, Mr. Finch? Ayanna's voice carried acid sweetness. Perhaps because we were educated specifically to understand the legal systems that govern our lives. Kiona stepped forward, opening one of her leather books to a marked page. We've been corresponding with the Bureau of Indian Affairs for 6 months, preparing all necessary documentation for legal marriage to Mr. Maddox. 6 months? Sterling stared at his wives in amazement. But we only met 4 months ago. Takala smiled at her husband. We knew about your land dispute with Mr. Finch before we ever met you, Sterling. We researched his tactics, his previous acquisitions, and his pattern of forcing out smaller ranchers. The pieces clicked into place for Captain Hawthorne. You sought out Maddox deliberately. This wasn't a random courtship. Precisely, Ayanna replied. Mr. Maddox needed wives to help work his ranch and legitimize his land claim. We needed legal protection and a way to stay in the territory without being forced back to the reservation. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. Agent Morrison looked up from the permits. These are all in order. The marriages are completely legal. He turned to Finch with suspicion. which means your telegram was filed under false pretenses. Finch's face turned red with fury. His carefully orchestrated plan had crumbled in minutes. Legal or not, no decent white man should be mixing blood with Apache women. It's against nature. The words hit the air like a physical slap. The three women exchanged glances, and something dangerous flickered in their eyes. Kiona spoke with deadly calm. Mr. Finch, we are certified teachers employed by the territorial education system. We pay taxes, own property, and vote in territorial elections. What exactly makes us unsuitable as wives? You're still Apache, Finch spat. Educated or not, you're still savage blood. That's when Takala stepped closer to Finch, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every person in the square. Mr. Finch, I studied your business practices very carefully before we came here. Your ranch expansion over the past 5 years has involved some very interesting land acquisitions. Tell me, does the territorial government know about the mineral rights you've been illegally claiming on federal land? Finch's face went white. What are you talking about? The copper deposits on the Patterson property that you purchased after their convenient barn fire. The silver vein on the Murphy ranch that you acquired after their cattle mysteriously died. Shall I continue? The crowd murmured uneasily. Everyone knew Finch had been lucky with his land deals, but they'd never questioned how lucky. Finch's hand dropped to his gun. You don't know what you're talking about. Apache witch. Captain Hawthorne's soldiers immediately raised their rifles. Stand down, Finch. Don't make this worse than it already is. But Finch was beyond reason. His entire empire was built on illegal activities, and these educated Apache women had just exposed him in front of the entire town. I won't be destroyed by savage women pretending to be civilized, he growled. Then he drew his gun, and that's when the real fight began. Finch's gun cleared leather, but he never got the chance to fire. Captain Hawthorne's soldiers moved with military precision. 3 rifles trained on Finch before his weapon reached waist level. His 2 hired gunmen found themselves staring down the barrels of government-issued Springfield rifles, their own hands frozen halfway to their holsters. Drop your weapons immediately, Hawthorne commanded. You're under arrest for threatening federal officials and filing false reports. Finch's face twisted with desperate rage. You can't protect them forever. This territory belongs to decent white folks, not educated savages pretending to be something they ain't. Ayanna stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult students. Mr. Finch, your ignorance is showing. We're not pretending to be anything. We are exactly what we appear to be. Educated American citizens exercising our legal rights. Agent Morrison consulted his papers again. Mr. Finch, these women's documentation is impeccable. Their marriage permits are signed by the highest territorial authorities. Your claims of kidnapping are demonstrably false. Furthermore, Takala added, pulling another document from her pouch, I took the liberty of researching your business practices while we were in town. This is a formal complaint I've prepared for the Territorial Attorney General regarding your illegal mineral claims and suspicious land acquisitions. Finch's gun hand began to shake. His entire criminal enterprise was unraveling in front of the whole town. You can't prove anything. Kiona opened her leather book to a marked page filled with careful notes. Actually, we can. We've documented every suspicious transaction, every convenient accident that preceded your land acquisitions, and every illegal claim you filed on federal mineral rights. The crowd murmured uneasily. If what the women said was true, Finch had been stealing from everyone, including the government. Mayor Crawford found his voice. Garrett, is this true? Have you been filing illegal claims? Finch's composure finally cracked. You fools don't understand what's at stake here. This territory is growing. There's money to be made, land to be claimed. I was building something for all of us. You were building it on theft and fraud, Captain Hawthorne stated coldly. Lower your weapon now, or my men will lower it for you. For a moment, Finch looked like he might fight. His eyes darted between the soldiers, the crowd, and the 3 Apache women who had destroyed his plans with nothing but intelligence and preparation. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. The gun dropped from his nerveless fingers and hit the dirt with a dull thud. Sergeant Mills, place Mr. Finch and his associates under arrest, Hawthorne ordered. They'll be transported to the territorial capital for trial. As the soldiers bound Finch's hands behind his back, he looked at Sterling with pure hatred. You think you've won, Maddox? You think marrying Apache women makes you respectable? This territory will never accept you. Sterling straightened his shoulders, flanked by his 3 educated wives. Maybe not, but these women are twice as smart as anyone in this town, including me. If the territory can't accept that, it's their loss. Reverend Michaels stepped forward hesitantly. Mr. Maddox, about the church ceremony you requested. If these ladies are truly certified Christians with proper documentation, Ayanna smiled graciously. Reverend, we would be honored to have our marriages blessed in your church. We are all baptized Christians, confirmed in the Episcopal faith at Carlisle. The transformation in the crowd was visible. What had begun as mockery and prejudice was slowly shifting to amazement and grudging respect. But the real test would come when the soldiers left, and Sterling and his wives had to build their life together in a town that had misjudged them so completely. The question now was whether Millbrook was ready to accept 3 Apache teachers as respected members of their community. 3 weeks later, the bell of Millbrook's church rang out across the valley as Reverend Michaels performed the blessing ceremony for Sterling and his 3 wives. The pews were filled with townspeople who had come to witness what many now called the most remarkable wedding in territorial history. Ayanna, Kiona, and Takala stood at the altar in their finest dresses, not Apache traditional wear, but elegant Christian gowns they had sewn themselves with skills learned at Carlisle. Their posture was proud, their voices clear as they recited their vows in perfect English that resonated through the church like music. Sterling had been transformed by the experience. The nervous defensive rancher who had ridden into town was now confident, standing tall beside 3 women who had taught him that intelligence and education could be more powerful than any gun. Mayor Crawford, still red-faced from his earlier humiliation, read a formal apology on behalf of the town council. We failed to recognize the dignity and accomplishment of these remarkable women. Millbrook is honored to welcome them as full citizens and neighbors. Mrs. Holloway had become one of their strongest supporters after Takala helped her daughter with advanced mathematics. I've never met anyone more refined or educated, she whispered to her husband during the ceremony. Agent Morrison delivered news that brought smiles to every face, except the prisoners. Garrett Finch has been sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison for fraud, illegal mineral claims, and filing false reports. His associates received 2 years each. All illegally acquired lands will be returned to their rightful owners or sold at public auction, Captain Hawthorne added. The territorial governor has personally commended the Maddox family for their cooperation in exposing corruption. Mrs. Ayanna Maddox has been offered a position as territorial education inspector, overseeing schools throughout the region. After the ceremony, the newlyweds returned to their ranch where the real work began. Sterling discovered that his wives brought more than just education to their marriage. They brought innovation. Ayanna introduced new teaching methods to the local school. Kiona applied scientific principles to farming that increased crop yields. Takala established a correspondence with territorial lawyers, ensuring that other mixed marriages would have proper legal protection. The ranch prospered like never before. Sterling learned to read and write fluently under his wives' patient instruction. They taught him bookkeeping, land management, and even some basic Apache language and customs. In return, he shared his knowledge of ranching, hunting, and surviving on the frontier. 6 months after that first day in Millbrook, Sterling sat on his porch watching his wives teach a group of local children, both white and Apache, in their outdoor classroom. The sight filled him with pride he had never imagined possible. The town had learned a valuable lesson about the danger of assumptions. The 3 women they had dismissed as savage had proven to be the most educated, capable, and dignified residents in the entire territory. Finch's empty ranch house stood as a reminder of what happened when greed and prejudice replaced wisdom and respect. His land had been sold to 3 Apache families who farmed it successfully, using modern agricultural techniques. Sterling Maddox had gained more than wives that day in Millbrook. He had gained partners, teachers, and friends who challenged him to become a better man. And the territory had gained 3 citizens whose contributions would be remembered for generations. The rancher, who had once been mocked for his choice, now commanded respect throughout the region. His Apache brides, who had been dismissed as silent savages, were recognized as some of the finest educators and most accomplished women in the territory. They had won more than legal recognition. They had won the right to define themselves on their own terms, in their own voices, speaking perfect English to anyone who would listen. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and justice collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.